widow accepted car on the edge of a cliff as payment. But what was in the trunk? Sharon Mitchell never imagined she would one day accept such a risky deal. After 3 years struggling to maintain the property she inherited from her husband, she found herself faced with a proposal any sensible person would reject without a second thought. It was on a Thursday afternoon that Gary Peterson knocked on her door, his eyes red and hands trembling. He was 2 months behind on the rent for the small plot he leased from her to plant corn and beans. "Mrs. Sharon, I know you've lost patience with me, but I have a proposal that might solve our problem." Sharon crossed her arms, observing the man who seemed to have aged 10 years since they last met. Gary had always been punctual with payments, but since he lost his crop in the flood the previous year, his life had fallen apart. "I don't have the money, but I have something that might be worth something," he continued, pointing toward the mountains surrounding the property. "There's a car up there, on the highest part of my plot. It's kind of complicated to get out, but if you accept it, it's yours." "What kind of complicated?" asked Sharon, suspicious. Gary swallowed hard before answering. "It's kind of hanging off the edge of a cliff, but it's a Ford Pinto 78. If you can get it out of there, you can sell the parts and get good money." The proposal was absurd. Sharon knew that part of the property, a steep and dangerous area where few ventured. But financial needs spoke louder than common sense. The taxes were overdue and she couldn't afford a lawyer to evict Gary. "How did that car end up there?" "It's a long story, Mrs. Sharon. My younger brother, he's no longer with us. He was the only one in the family who knew how to drive, and on a rainy night about 2 years ago." Gary couldn't finish the sentence. Sharon saw the pain on his face and decided not to press the matter. What mattered now was finding a practical solution for both their problems. "If I accept this craziness, you consider the debt settled?" "Yes, ma'am, and I'll still help get the car out of there if you want." Sharon looked at the mountainous landscape stretching beyond her house. That land had been in her family for 3 generations, but since Richard died, everything had become a burden too heavy for her shoulders. Maybe that car really could solve her problems. "All right, Gary, but I want to see this car first before making any deal." The man's face lit up with a relief he couldn't disguise. "You won't regret it, Mrs. Sharon. Tomorrow morning I'll come get you to show you where it is." That night, Sharon couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about whether she had made the right decision. She knew the risks of that part of the property well, a place even animals avoided. But she also knew the need that forced her to consider any alternative. The next morning, Gary arrived promptly at 7 o'clock, accompanied by his 2 oldest sons, Tyler and Brandon, clever boys of 12 and 14, who always helped their father with the farm work. Sharon had known them since they were little and knew they were responsible and hard-working. "I brought the boys because we'll need help getting up there," explained Gary. "The path isn't easy. The hike was harder than Sharon expected. Even being a strong woman used to farm work, she had to stop several times to catch her breath. The terrain was steep and full of loose stones that slipped underfoot. When they finally reached the spot, Sharon was speechless. The car was literally hanging on the edge of a cliff, suspended only by a few trees that had grown among the rocks and were holding the rear of the vehicle. "Good heavens, Gary! How am I going to get that out of there?" "We can do it, Mrs. Sharon," said Tyler, the eldest son. "My brother and I already thought of a way. If you can get some really strong ropes, we'll tie them to the rear and pull slowly." Brandon, the youngest, ran to the edge of the cliff with the agility typical of his age, ignoring his father's warning shouts. "Hey, Dad! The car is steady. The trees are holding it well. And look, there's a padlock on the trunk." Sharon approached carefully, her heart racing. There was indeed a sturdy padlock locking the vehicle's trunk. Why would someone put a padlock on an abandoned car? "Gary, what's in this trunk?" The man averted his gaze, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "I don't know, Mrs. Sharon. When we found the car, it was already like that. My brother never mentioned anything about storing something there." Something in Gary's voice didn't ring true to Sharon, but she decided not to press the matter at that moment. The important thing was to recover the vehicle first. "All right, I'll get the ropes and we'll try. But if anything goes wrong, the responsibility is mine, understood?" The boys agreed enthusiastically, seeing it as a great adventure. Sharon, on the other hand, felt a chill in her stomach that had nothing to do with the height of the cliff. Back at the house, she searched for the strongest ropes she had. Richard always kept good quality equipment, and she found 2 climbing ropes he used when he worked in construction before inheriting the family land. When they returned to the site, more people had arrived. The news that someone would try to recover the hanging car had spread through the neighborhood, and curious onlookers appeared to watch the spectacle. Among them was Mrs. Dorothy, a 70-year-old lady who lived on the neighboring property and was known for always giving her 2 cents on everything. With her came her twin granddaughters, Emily and Madison, 10-year-old girls who were inseparable and known for their sharp intelligence. "Sharon, you've gone completely mad," shouted Mrs. Dorothy before even greeting her. "That car is going to plunge and could hurt someone." "Calm down, Mrs. Dorothy," replied Sharon, trying to maintain patience. "We'll do everything carefully." The twins approached Tyler and Brandon, observing the car with a scientific curiosity that surprised the adults. "Why is there a padlock on the trunk?" asked Emily. "And why is the car in such a strange position?" added Madison. "It doesn't look like a common accident." Gary became visibly nervous at the girls' questions. "Girls, you ask too many questions. Let's focus on getting the car out of there." But the twins were not intimidated. They had the curiosity typical of smart children and sensed there was something odd about the situation. "Uncle Gary," said Madison, using the respectful address all the children in the area used for adults, "my grandfather always said that when a car goes down a slope, it rolls until it stops. But this one is hanging just right, as if someone had parked it there on purpose." The girl's observation made all the adults look at the car with new eyes. Indeed, the vehicle's position was too strange to be the result of an accident. Sharon felt a shiver run down her spine. What exactly was Gary trying to hide? "Let's get started with this right away," she said, trying to push away the disturbing thoughts. "The longer we wait, the more dangerous it gets." Tyler and Brandon tied the ropes to the rear of the car with the skill of those who had practiced it before. Sharon noticed the boys' expertise and wondered how many times they had tried to recover that vehicle. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. With the ropes properly secured, the rescue operation began. Sharon, Gary, and the 4 boys positioned themselves at the end of the ropes, while Mrs. Dorothy shouted instructions that no one asked for. "Pull slowly! Don't all pull at once!" the lady yelled, gesturing exaggeratedly. The first pulls were tense. The car groaned and moved slightly, causing small rocks to break loose from the slope and fall into the ravine. The sound of rocks hitting the stones below made everyone realize the real extent of the danger they were facing. "It's working!" shouted Brandon, excited. "The car is moving!" But then something unexpected happened. During one of the stronger pulls, a strange sound came from inside the trunk, a sound that made everyone stop immediately. "Did you hear that?" asked Emily, her eyes wide. "Yes, I heard it," replied Madison. It sounded like something moving in there." Gary turned pale. "It's probably just the wind making noise in the old metalwork," he said, but his voice trembled. Sharon approached the car as close as she could without putting herself in danger. The sound really had come from the trunk, and it didn't seem like just rusty metal rattling. "There's something alive in there," she said, feeling her heart race. "That's impossible, Mrs. Sharon," protested Gary. "The car has been here for 2 years. If there was an animal, it would have already—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Everyone knew what he was thinking. "What if it's a wounded animal?" suggested Tyler. "Sometimes animals hide in strange places when they're hurt." The possibility of a wounded animal completely changed the urgency of the situation. Sharon, who had always had a special affection for animals, felt they needed to speed up the rescue. "Let's continue," she decided. "If there's a little creature in there, it needs help." They resumed the rescue operation with renewed determination. This time, the work was more coordinated. Tyler naturally took the lead, guiding when to pull and when to stop. Brandon was responsible for observing the car's stability, while the twins took turns alerting about loose rocks. Little by little, the vehicle was pulled away from the edge of the ravine. The operation lasted almost 2 hours, and when the car finally touched solid ground, everyone celebrated as if they had conquered Everest. But the joy was short-lived. The sound from the trunk returned, this time louder and clearer. There was definitely something moving inside. Sharon approached the padlock with her heart in her throat. It was an old but sturdy model, clearly placed there to prevent anyone from opening the trunk. "Gary, I need to know what's in there before I accept this car." "Mrs. Sharon, I swear I don't know. When we found the vehicle, it was already locked like this." The twins approached the padlock with the curiosity typical of smart children. "My grandfather taught me a technique for opening old padlocks," said Madison. "If it's a model from the 70s, maybe I can do it." "Madison, you can't go fiddling with that," warned Mrs. Dorothy. "It could be dangerous." But the girl was already examining the mechanism with scientific attention. "It's a Secure Lock 40, model 1975. My grandfather had one just like it. If I can find a thin wire and apply the right pressure—" "Where does this girl know so much about padlocks?" murmured Gary. "Her grandfather was a locksmith," explained Tyler, "and she always paid attention when he fixed things." Madison asked for a thin wire, and Brandon quickly found a piece of broken fence nearby. With precise movements that impressed everyone present, the girl began working on the mechanism. "Be careful, Madison," said Sharon, but she herself was curious to know what was hidden there. After a few minutes of concentration, the padlock clicked and opened. "I did it," celebrated Madison, but the smile vanished from her face when she looked at what was in the trunk. Everyone approached in silence. Inside the compartment were dozens of shoeboxes carefully organized. The boxes were tied with string and protected from moisture by plastic bags. "What is this?" asked Emily. Sharon picked up one of the nearest boxes. It was surprisingly well preserved, despite the time the car had spent exposed to the elements. When she opened the first box, she found hundreds of letters carefully organized by date. All were addressed to the same person. Elizabeth Mitchell, St. Agnes Home, 245 Blossom Street. "Elizabeth Mitchell," murmured Sharon, feeling the familiar name on her tongue. "Mrs. Sharon, do you know this person?" asked Tyler. Sharon picked up one of the letters with trembling hands. The name Elizabeth Mitchell was etched in her memory like a wound that had never fully healed. "Elizabeth Mitchell was my mother." The silence that followed was broken only by the wind blowing through the mountains. Everyone watched Sharon, realizing that this moment held an importance that went beyond simple curiosity. "Your mother worked at St. Agnes Home?" asked Mrs. Dorothy, with an unusual softness in her voice. I don't know. She left me when I was 5. I never knew where she went or why." Sharon opened one of the letters carefully, as if it might crumble in her hands. The letter was from a child, written in the uneven handwriting typical of someone learning to write. "Dear Aunt Elizabeth, thank you for teaching me how to make that chocolate cake yesterday. I promise I will study hard and be a good girl so you can be proud of me. When do you think you'll be able to adopt me? I pray every day to Jesus to let it happen soon. With love, your heart's daughter, Jennifer." Tears began to stream down Sharon's face. There were dozens of similar letters, all written by different children, all treating Elizabeth as a caring, dedicated maternal figure. "Aunt Elizabeth used to take us fishing in the river behind the orphanage," Sharon read aloud, picking up another letter. "She said when I grow up I can live with her in a house with a garden full of flowers." The revelation was overwhelming. Her mother had not only worked at the orphanage, but had developed deep bonds with the children who lived there. And from the tone of the letters, she had made promises she apparently never managed to keep. "Mrs. Sharon," said Emily softly, "there are more boxes here." The other boxes contained photographs, hundreds of photographs showing Elizabeth Mitchell surrounded by smiling children. In the pictures, she appeared to be a joyful and affectionate woman, always smiling, always hugging a child. One photo particularly caught Sharon's attention. In it, her mother was holding a girl of about 5, the same age Sharon was when she was abandoned. The child had curly hair and a radiant smile. "This girl in the photo looks like me when I was little," she said, showing the photo to Mrs. Dorothy. "It really does," confirmed the elderly lady. "But are you sure your mother worked at this orphanage? When was this?" Sharon calculated mentally. The letters were dated from the late 1980s, a time when she was already being raised by her paternal grandparents at the family farm. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "If she was taking care of those children, why did she leave me with my grandparents?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. But there were more revelations in the boxes. One of them contained official documents, birth certificates, medical reports, and adoption records. All the documents were related to the children from the orphanage. One of the adoption records caught Sharon's attention. It was for a girl named Jennifer Brown, the same one who had written several of the letters. According to the document, Elizabeth Mitchell had initiated the adoption process for the girl in 1988, but the process had been abruptly halted without explanation. "Gary," said Sharon, turning to the man who had remained quiet throughout the discovery, "did you know about this? Did you know these letters were in the car?" Gary averted his eyes, clearly uncomfortable. My brother mentioned once that he'd found some old things in the car, but he never said they were letters. We thought they were unimportant documents." "And why did you never open the trunk to check?" "We couldn't open the padlock, and after my brother's accident, I avoided messing with his things." There was something in Gary's voice that suggested he knew more than he was saying, but Sharon decided not to press the matter at that moment. Her mind was focused on processing the discovery about her mother. Tyler picked up one of the last letters from the pile. This one was different from the others, written on letterhead paper and in an adult's handwriting. "Mrs. Sharon, this one looks like an official letter." Sharon read the document aloud. "Elizabeth Mitchell, we inform you that due to irregularities found in your professional conduct, your employment contract with St. Agnes Home is being terminated with immediate effect. The children under your care will be reassigned to other caregivers. We recommend that you do not maintain contact with the minors to facilitate the adaptation process. Dr. Howard Williams, Director of St. Agnes Home." The silence that followed was heavy. Sharon felt as if the world had stopped spinning. Her mother had lost her job at the orphanage, but why? And what did that have to do with her abandonment? "What kind of irregularities?" asked Madison, always direct in her observations. "I don't know," replied Sharon, but a terrible suspicion began to form in her mind. Maybe she left me to take care of those children at the orphanage." The possibility was too painful to accept. Sharon had always imagined her mother had abandoned her because she didn't want her, but what if the truth was more complicated? What if Elizabeth had sacrificed her own daughter to care for dozens of other children who needed her? "Mrs. Sharon," said Emily, rummaging in one of the last boxes, "there's a letter here that's more recent. Look at the date, December 2019. Sharon took the letter with trembling hands. It was written on plain paper, in the handwriting of someone who was no longer a child. "Aunt Elizabeth, I know you will probably never receive this letter, but I need to try. My name is Jennifer Brown, but when I was little you called me Jenny. I lived at St. Agnes Home from 1985 until 1992. You promised you would adopt me, and I waited all these years believing that one day it would happen. Today I am a teacher here in Kentucky and have my own children. I'm not writing to demand anything, just to say that the memories I have of you are the happiest of my childhood. If this letter ever reaches you, know that I never forgot the affection you showed me. I am living in Deepwell. I work at Lincoln Elementary School. If you want to meet me, I would be very happy. With all my love, Jennifer." Sharon felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. That letter had been written just a few years ago, which meant Jennifer was still alive and still thought of Elizabeth. "Deepwell is about 50 kilometers from here," said Mrs. Dorothy. "My sister lived there for many years." Do you think I should look for this Jennifer?" asked Sharon. "Of course you should," exclaimed the twins at the same time. "This could be the chance to find out what really happened to your mother," added Madison. But Sharon was torn between curiosity and fear. What if she discovered truths she'd rather not know? What if her mother had really consciously abandoned her to care for other children? "I need to think," she said, putting the letters back in the boxes. "This is a lot of information to process at once." Gary, who had remained quiet during the entire discovery, approached her. "Mrs. Sharon, what are you going to do with the car? Is our deal still on?" Gary's question seemed trivial in light of everything she had discovered, But Sharon realized she still needed to resolve the practical matter. "The car is mine, as we agreed. But Gary, I need you to be honest with me. Did you really not know these letters were in there?" The man hesitated before answering. My brother mentioned once that he had saved some things for someone, but he drank a lot and talked a lot of nonsense. I never took it seriously. Saved for whom? I don't know, Mrs. Sharon. He died before he could explain it properly. There were many confusing details in Gary's story, but Sharon decided to accept his version for now. The important thing now was to figure out what to do with the information she had found. That night, after everyone had left, Sharon was alone rereading some of the letters. With each line, she discovered more details about her mother's personality and about the love she had dedicated to those children. In one letter, a girl described how Elizabeth had comforted her during a storm, telling stories until the fear passed. In another, a boy thanked her for the Christmas presents Elizabeth had made with her own hands. All the letters painted the portrait of a caring, dedicated woman deeply connected to the children she cared for. The contrast with the distant, absent mother Sharon had always imagined was painful. Why would a woman capable of so much love leave her own daughter? The answer came in a letter she had almost missed. It was folded at the bottom of one of the boxes, as if it had fallen accidentally. It was a letter Elizabeth had started to write but never finished. "My dear Sharon, I know you will grow up hating me, and I won't be able to blame you for it. What I am doing is unfair to you, but circumstances force me to make impossible choices. There are dozens of children here who have no one in the world, while you have your grandparents who love you and can give you a good life. One day, when you are an adult, perhaps you can understand that sometimes love demands sacrifices that seem like cruelty. The letter stopped there, abruptly interrupted. Sharon read and reread those lines, trying to understand her mother's logic. Elizabeth had sacrificed the relationship with her own daughter to devote herself completely to the abandoned children at the orphanage. It was a logic Sharon could understand intellectually, but one that tore her heart emotionally. The next morning she woke up with a decision made. She needed to find Jennifer and discover more about Elizabeth Mitchell. She needed to understand the woman who had chosen dozens of adoptive children over her biological daughter. The trip to Deepwell was quiet and full of anticipation. Sharon had asked Tyler and Brandon to accompany her, and the boys agreed with the typical enthusiasm of their age. For them, this was an exciting adventure. Lincoln Elementary School was a simple but well-kept building surrounded by trees with a playground where children played during recess. Sharon felt her stomach tighten as she approached the main office. "Good afternoon, I'm looking for the teacher Jennifer Brown." "Teacher Jennifer is in room 3, teaching the 4th grade," replied the secretary. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's about a very important personal matter. It has to do with St. Agnes Home." The mention of the orphanage made the secretary raise her eyebrows. "I'll call her at the end of class, which finishes in 20 minutes. You can wait in the teacher's lounge." While she waited, Sharon observed the activity in the school. It was a cheerful and welcoming environment, where the children seemed genuinely happy. She imagined what those children's childhoods were like, compared to the experience of growing up in an orphanage. When Jennifer appeared in the teacher's lounge, Sharon recognized her immediately from the photographs. She was a woman of about 40, with curly hair and a warm smile that reminded Sharon of the childhood pictures she had found. "The secretary said you wanted to speak to me about St. Agnes Home. Not many people remember that place." "My name is Sharon Mitchell. I'm the daughter of Elizabeth Mitchell." The smile vanished from Jennifer's face, replaced by an expression of shock that quickly turned into intense emotion. "Elizabeth Mitchell. Aunt Elizabeth," she murmured, her eyes welling up. "My God, after all these years." "I found your letters, all of them, and I came to find you to try to understand who my mother really was." Jennifer sat down heavily in a chair, as if her legs could no longer support her. "My letters? You found them? How? Where?" Sharon told the whole story, from Gary's proposal to the discovery of the boxes in the car's trunk. Jennifer listened in silence, occasionally wiping away tears that insisted on falling. "I wrote so many letters to her over the years," said Jennifer when Sharon finished. "I never knew why she left so suddenly. One day she was there, The next, she had disappeared. No one explained anything to us. What do you remember about her? Jennifer closed her eyes as if reliving distant memories. Aunt Elizabeth she was the kindest person I ever knew. She wasn't just another employee at the orphanage. She truly cared for each of us as if we were her own children. But then why did she leave me? If she loved children so much, why did she abandon her own daughter? Sharon's question was loaded with pain, and Jennifer sensed it. I remember a conversation I had with her shortly before she left. I must have been about 8 years old at the time. She was sad, sadder than I had ever seen her, and she told me something I never forgot. Jennifer paused, organizing her memories. She said, "Jenny, sometimes people have to make very difficult choices. Sometimes we have to stop caring for one person we love so we can care for many others who also need our love. At the time I didn't understand, but now you think she was talking about me. I think your mother sacrificed herself for us, and I think it destroyed her inside." The revelation was like a dagger to Sharon's heart. Her mother had sacrificed their happiness to save dozens of other children. It was an act of extraordinary generosity and personal cruelty at the same time. Jennifer, I need to know what happened to her after she left the orphanage. Do you have any idea where she might have gone? No, but I know someone who might. There's a gentleman who worked as a janitor at the orphanage, Mr. Howard. He still lives here in town. If anyone knows anything about Aunt Elizabeth, it's him. The mention of Howard made Sharon remember the official letter she had found. The orphanage director was also named Howard Williams. Could it be the same person? Is this Howard's last name Williams? Yes, why? Because I found a letter signed by a Dr. Howard Williams, the orphanage director, firing my mother for professional misconduct. Jennifer's face tightened into an expression of anger. Misconduct? Aunt Elizabeth's only misconduct was loving the children too much. Dr. Howard was a cold, calculating man who saw the orphanage as a business. Do you think he made up an excuse to fire my mother? I'm sure of it. Several employees were fired back then, all the ones who truly cared about the children. Dr. Howard wanted people who would just do the basic work without forming emotional bonds. The revelation completely changed Sharon's perspective on what had happened. Her mother hadn't been fired for incompetence, but for caring too much. Where can I find this Dr. Howard? He lives in a retirement home here in town, St. Francis Retirement Home. But Sharon, be prepared. He is not a pleasant person. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That afternoon, Sharon went to St. Francis Retirement Home with a heavy heart. Jennifer had offered to go with her, but she preferred to go alone. Some conversations need to be had without witnesses. Dr. Howard Williams was an 82-year-old man, thin with a severe gaze. Even sitting in a wheelchair, his posture was rigid and authoritarian. When Sharon mentioned the name Elizabeth Mitchell, she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Elizabeth Mitchell. I haven't heard that name in a long time. What do you want to know about her? I'm her daughter. I want to understand why she was fired from the orphanage. Dr. Howard studied her for a few seconds before answering. Your mother was a problematic employee. She couldn't maintain the professional distance necessary for the job. Professional distance. She was taking care of abandoned children. Exactly. And taking care does not mean forming inappropriate emotional bonds. Elizabeth Mitchell turned the orphanage into her personal family, which was harmful both to the children and to the institution. The coldness with which Dr. Howard spoke about the matter infuriated Sharon. Harmful? Giving love and affection to orphaned children is harmful. Love and affection create expectations, miss. Expectations lead to frustration when the children discover they cannot be adopted by the person who cared for them. Elizabeth promised things she couldn't deliver. What kind of promises? Dr. Howard sighed, as if being forced to explain something obvious to a slow person. She promised to adopt several of the children. She started adoption processes she couldn't complete. When we discovered she already had a daughter she had abandoned, we realized she wasn't mentally stable to care for more children. The revelation hit Sharon like a bolt of lightning. Dr. Howard knew Elizabeth had a daughter. and that knowledge had been used against her. How did you find out about me? We investigated all our employees. We discovered Elizabeth had left a daughter with her grandparents to be able to work at the orphanage. That demonstrated questionable moral judgment. Or it demonstrated that she sacrificed herself to care for children who had no one. Or it demonstrated she had trouble prioritizing responsibilities. A mother who abandons her own child shouldn't be taking care of other people's children. Dr. Howard's cold logic made sense from an administrative perspective, but completely ignored the humanity of the situation. Elizabeth had made an impossible choice, and when that choice was discovered, she was punished for it. What happened to her after the dismissal? I don't know. She left town, and I never heard from her again. But did you keep the letters the children wrote to her? Dr. Howard seemed surprised by the question. What letters? The letters the children from the orphanage wrote to my mother over the years. I found hundreds of them. I don't know anything about any letters. After Elizabeth left, we forbade the children from mentioning her name. It was to ease the adjustment process. Sharon realized Dr. Howard wasn't lying about not knowing of the letters. That meant someone else had collected and kept that correspondence. Dr. Howard, was there anyone else at the orphanage who was close to my mother? The caretaker, Benjamin. He had worked there for decades and had an excessive fondness for Elizabeth. It might have been him who kept those letters you mentioned. Is Benjamin still alive? He died 3 years ago, but I heard he left some things stored with a family member. Sharon left the retirement home with more questions than answers. With each discovery, more layers of the story revealed themselves, like infinite nesting dolls hiding other nesting dolls. Back at the school, she found Jennifer correcting tests in the teacher's lounge. How did the talk with Dr. Howard go? Enlightening and disturbing at the same time. Jennifer, do you remember a caretaker named Benjamin? Jennifer's face lit up. Mr. Benjamin, of course I remember. He was almost as affectionate with the children as Aunt Elizabeth. He always secretly gave us candy and fixed our broken toys. Dr. Howard said he might have kept the letters you all wrote to my mother. That would make perfect sense. Mr. Benjamin knew how sad we were when Aunt Elizabeth left. He must have kept the letters, hoping he could deliver them someday. Do you know where I can find his family? He had a nephew who works at the gas station at the town entrance. I can take you there. The gas station was a simple but busy establishment. Benjamin's nephew, a middle-aged man named John, was checking a car's oil when they arrived. When Jennifer explained who Sharon was and what they were looking for, John stopped what he was doing and gave them his full attention. My uncle talked a lot about this Elizabeth Mitchell. He said she was a saint who had been treated unfairly. Did your uncle keep anything of hers? Yes, he did. There's an old chest at my house full of things from the orphanage. My wife always complains, says it's junk, but I never had the heart to throw it away. My uncle asked me to keep it safe. Can I see those things? Of course, I'll close the station in an hour. If you want to wait, I can take you to my house. John's house was simple and cozy, with a garden where his wife grew vegetables. The chest was stored in a back room covered with old sheets. When John opened the chest, Sharon saw much more than she expected. Besides documents and photographs, there were personal items: a simple necklace, a handwritten recipe notebook, and a cloth doll made from colorful scraps. My uncle said Elizabeth left these things when she left. She was in such a hurry that she forgot to take them. Sharon carefully picked up the recipe notebook. On the cover was written, "For my girls," in Elizabeth's neat handwriting. Inside were dozens of simple recipes: cornmeal cake, coconut candy, brigadeiro, milk pudding. Each recipe came with little notes. Jenny loves this cake. Make for Lulu's birthday. Grandma Mary's recipe for sad days. She made sweets for you? Yes, she did, replied Jennifer, her eyes misty. Every weekend she'd come up with an excuse to make something tasty. She said a happy child is a well-fed child. At the bottom of the chest, Sharon found something that made her stop breathing. A letter addressed to her. For my daughter Sharon, when she is grown and can understand. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. The letter was long, written in Elizabeth's careful handwriting. My dear daughter, if you are reading this letter, it means you have managed to find me, or at least find the footprints I left along the way. I know you must hate me for leaving you, and I cannot blame you for that. What I did was selfish and cruel, but it was also necessary. When you were born, I was very young and could not properly care for you. Your grandparents offered all the love and stability I could not give. I thought it would be temporary, that in a few years I could get myself together and come back for you. It was then that I started working at St. Agnes Home. For the first time in my life, I felt I had a purpose. Those children needed so much love, so much care, that I devoted myself completely to them. And at some point I realized you were growing up happy and loved with your grandparents, while these other children only had me. I know this does not justify my absence in your life. I know you grew up with questions I should have answered. But I hope that one day you can understand that sometimes love forces us to make choices that seem cruel, but are made with a heart full of affection. If you are reading this, you have probably already met some of the children I helped raise. I hope you can see in them a little of the love I felt for you, even from afar. Always your mother, Elizabeth. Sharon finished reading the letter in absolute silence. Jennifer and John respected her moment of privacy, sensing the importance of that instant. Finally, after 43 years, Sharon had the answers she had been seeking. Her mother had not abandoned her for lack of love, but for a distorted form of love that led her to sacrifice personal happiness for the good of other people. It was an answer that brought no relief, only a painful understanding of the complexity of human choices. "Sharon," said Jennifer softly, "may I ask a question?" "Of course." "What will you do now that you know the truth?" Sharon looked at the rag doll in the trunk. It was made from patches of different fabrics, sewn with uneven stitches, but there was so much affection in every detail that she could almost feel the love Elizabeth had put into that work. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I spent my whole life hating a woman I didn't know. Now I discover she sacrificed herself for other people, but that doesn't erase the fact that I grew up without a mother. Are you angry with her?" "I am. But I also have, I don't know, a strange admiration. How many people would be capable of giving up their own happiness to care for strangers?" John, who had been quiet throughout the conversation, spoke up. "My uncle always said that Elizabeth Mitchell was a woman who was born to be everyone's mother. Maybe that was her problem." The man's simple observation struck a deep chord in Sharon. Elizabeth really did seem to have been born to be a universal mother, unable to distinguish between biological children and children of the heart. "John, may I take these things? I would like to keep them." "Of course. My uncle would be happy to know they ended up in the right hands." Back in the car, Jennifer made a suggestion that surprised Sharon. "Have you ever thought about looking for other people from the orphanage? I know several of the children grew up and stayed in the area. Maybe they have other memories, other clues about your mother. Do you think it's worth it?" "I think you should meet all the children your mother chose, to fully understand who she was." The idea was tempting and frightening at the same time. Sharon spent decades being an only child, and now she discovered she had dozens of siblings scattered throughout the region. During the trip back, she thought of Tyler and Brandon, who had stayed at the school waiting. The boys had been crucial to that whole discovery, and she felt they were now part of the story too. When she got home, she found the boys talking animatedly with the twins Emily and Madison in the backyard. Dorothy was there as well, sipping coffee and commenting on everything. "So, Mrs. Sharon, did you discover anything interesting?" asked Mrs. Dorothy as soon as she got out of the car. Sharon briefly recounted what she had discovered, omitting only the most personal details from Elizabeth's letter. The children listened with rapt attention, asking smart questions that sometimes surprised the adults. "So your mother was like a mother to dozens of children?" asked Madison. "She was." "And now you have a bunch of siblings you've never even met?" added Emily. "Kind of, yes." Tyler and Brandon exchanged meaningful looks. "Mrs. Sharon, are you going to try to find these people?" asked Tyler. "I'm thinking about it. Why?" "Because it would be cool to meet your family. And besides, we could help organize a gathering here at the property. You have plenty of space." The boy's suggestion was simple, but it had a profound impact on Sharon. She really did have plenty of space on the property, and the idea of gathering all the people touched by Elizabeth was appealing. "Do you think people would come?" "If they liked your mother as much as Teacher Jennifer, I'm sure they would," said Madison. But it would be a huge responsibility to organize something like that, Sharon pondered. We'll help, offered all 4 children at once. Mrs. Dorothy, who had remained quiet during the conversation, spoke up. Sharon, can I give some advice from someone who's lived a long life? Of course, Mrs. Dorothy. Sometimes we spend our whole lives looking for answers to the wrong questions. Maybe instead of trying to understand why your mother did what she did, you should think about what you can do with the legacy she left behind. What kind of legacy? The legacy of caring for people in need. Look at how many lives she touched, and now you have the chance to continue that work in your own way. Mrs. Dorothy's suggestion planted a seed in Sharon's mind. She had spent years feeling like a victim of Elizabeth's abandonment, but what if she could turn that experience into something positive? That night, Sharon stayed up late, thinking about the possibilities. The farm she had inherited from her husband was too big for one person, and she had always struggled to maintain it. What if she could use that space for something more meaningful? The next morning, she woke up with a decision made. She would organize a gathering to bring together all the people who had known Elizabeth at the orphanage, not just to meet them, but to create something new from those connections. Jennifer was excited by the idea when Sharon approached her at the school. I'm in touch with at least 6 people from the orphanage who still live in the area, and they probably know others. Do you think they would come? I'm sure. We've all always wondered what happened to Aunt Elizabeth. Knowing she had a daughter and getting to meet you would be a gift to any of us. In the following days, Sharon dedicated herself completely to organizing the gathering. Tyler and Brandon proved to be natural organizers, creating task lists and taking charge of practical details like cleaning and setup. The twins were responsible for creating posters, explaining the story, and inviting people. Their creativity and dedication impressed all the adults involved. Mrs. Dorothy took charge of coordinating the food, mobilizing other ladies from the area to prepare a feast worthy of the occasion. Meanwhile, Jennifer dedicated herself to locating and contacting the former children from the orphanage. With every phone call she made, more people became excited about the possibility of the gathering. Gary, who had kept a low profile since the discovery of the letters, showed up at Sharon's property one afternoon to offer his help. Mrs. Sharon, I know you must still be angry with me for not telling you about the letters sooner. I'm not angry, Gary. I just wish I understood better how they ended up in your brother's car. Gary sighed deeply before answering. My brother worked as a driver for several people in the area. Once he told me he had helped move some things for a woman who was leaving town in a hurry. He said she seemed very sad and was taking very little, just one small suitcase. And he kept the letters. He kept everything she forgot in the car. He said he would look for her family to return it someday, but he never got around to it. After the accident, I didn't know what to do with those things. Why didn't you tell me this from the start? Because I was afraid you'd think we were trying to hide something valuable. And also because, well, my brother had problems with drinking, and I wasn't sure if his story was true. Gary's explanation made sense, and Sharon realized he had carried an unnecessary burden all those years. Gary, do you want to help with the gathering? Yes, I do, Mrs. Sharon. I think it would be a way to honor my brother's memory, too. 2 weeks before the gathering, confirmations began to arrive. Jennifer had managed to locate 12 people who had been raised at St. Agnes Home during the period Elizabeth worked there. They were all eager to participate, but then an unexpected problem arose. Dr. Howard Williams learned about the gathering through town gossip and sent a message through his lawyer claiming that any event related to the old orphanage would need his authorization. That's ridiculous, exclaimed Sharon when Jennifer told her about the legal threat. The gathering is on my property and has nothing to do with official orphanage matters. Dr. Howard has always been like that. Controlling and petty. He can't stand the idea of people getting together to speak well of Aunt Elizabeth. What can we do? Ignore him. He's an old man with no real power to stop a private meeting. He's just trying to intimidate. Sharon decided to follow Jennifer's advice and continue with the preparations. The property was becoming unrecognizable with so much care and dedication. The boys had weeded all the common areas, the twins had improvised decorations with wildflowers, and Mrs. Dorothy had supervised a thorough cleaning that left everything spotless. On the eve of the gathering, Sharon woke up with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. It was as if she was about to meet a family she never knew she had. Jennifer arrived early, bringing with her a box of photographs she had collected from the other participants. They were pictures of the orphanage, of the children, and many of Elizabeth Mitchell at different times. "I thought it would be nice to set up a display with these photos," explained Jennifer, "so everyone can remember the good times." Sharon looked at the photographs with growing emotion. In all of them, her mother appeared smiling, always surrounded by children, always looking genuinely happy. In one photo, Elizabeth was teaching a group of girls how to make cloth dolls. You could see the concentration and affection with which she guided each movement of their small hands. "She really enjoyed teaching you all practical things," observed Sharon. "She did. She said every child needed to know how to make something with their own hands. For us, it was pure fun. But she was teaching us skills we would use our whole lives." The first guest arrived promptly at 10 in the morning. He was a middle-aged, well-dressed man who introduced himself as Matthew Anderson. He had been one of the older children at the orphanage and remembered Elizabeth clearly. "Aunt Elizabeth taught me how to read," were the first words he said to Sharon. "I was already 12 and still couldn't put letters together. The other staff said I was lazy, but she realized I had vision problems." Gradually, other participants arrived. Each brought their own memories and stories about Elizabeth Mitchell. Sharon found herself at the center of a group of people who shared a common mother, even though they weren't blood siblings. Lucy, a 50-year-old lady who worked as a nurse, told how Elizabeth had encouraged her to study, even when everyone said an orphanage girl didn't need an education. Paul, a shy man who had become a carpenter, remembered how Elizabeth had saved his handiwork when Dr. Howard wanted to throw it all away, calling it useless junk. Each story revealed a different aspect of Elizabeth's personality, painting the portrait of a woman who saw unique potential in every child and dedicated herself to nurturing that potential. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. As the day progressed, Sharon realized something special was happening. It wasn't just a nostalgic gathering, but the rebirth of a family that had been scattered decades ago. The neighborhood children circulated among the adults, listening to stories and asking smart questions that often surprised the participants. Tyler and Brandon seemed especially fascinated with Paul's stories about carpentry. "Mr. Paul, could you teach us how to make some things?" asked Tyler. "Of course, son. It would be a pleasure. Aunt Elizabeth always said knowledge is meant to be shared." The twins approached Lucy with curiosity about nursing, while Mrs. Dorothy exchanged recipes with several people who remembered the sweets Elizabeth used to make. It was then that Sharon had an epiphany. These people weren't just memories of her mother's past, but could be part of her own future. "Everyone," she said, asking for everyone's attention, "can I ask a kind of crazy question?" "Of course," several voices replied at once. "Do you think Aunt Elizabeth would be happy if we could continue her work in some way?" "How so?" asked Jennifer. "Well, I have this large property, you all have different skills, and there are these neighborhood children here who are always willing to learn new things. What if we created a place where people could gather to teach and learn from each other?" The suggestion was met with immediate enthusiasm. Paul offered to teach carpentry, Lucy to give basic first aid lessons, Jennifer to coordinate educational activities. "It would be like an informal community center," said Matthew. "A place where people could come to learn practical skills and exchange experiences." "And it wouldn't be just for children," added one of the participants, a woman named Ruth, who worked as a seamstress. "Many adults would also like to learn new things." The idea took shape as people contributed suggestions. It wouldn't be a formal institution, but rather a community support network where each person would contribute their specific skills. "But that would be a lot of work to organize," pondered Sharon, "and I have no experience with this sort of thing." "No one needs to organize it alone," said Jennifer. "We can do it on a rotating schedule. Each person will be responsible for a specific activity." "And we can start small," suggested Ruth. "Maybe once a month, only on weekends. If it works, we expand." Mrs. Dorothy, who had remained quiet throughout the discussion, spoke up with her characteristic wisdom. "Do you know what you're doing? You're recreating exactly what Aunt Elizabeth used to do at the orphanage, but without the bureaucratic limitations. She would be proud." The elderly woman's observation brought tears to several people's eyes. It was true. They were unconsciously recreating the loving and educational environment that Elizabeth had provided decades before. "So it's decided?" asked Sharon. "Are we going to try to make this happen?" The response was an enthusiastic chorus of approval. At that moment, Sharon felt she finally understood her mother's legacy. Elizabeth hadn't just cared for orphaned children, she had planted seeds of love and learning that kept sprouting decades later. The first meeting of what they decided to call the Knowledge Circle was scheduled for the following month. Each person committed to preparing a specific activity and bringing other people who might be interested. When the last guest left, late in the afternoon, Sharon sat on the porch of her house and looked at the property with new eyes. That land was no longer just a burden inherited from her husband, but a space full of possibilities. Tyler and Brandon approached, still excited about everything they had heard and seen during the day. "Mrs. Sharon, do you really think this will work?" asked Brandon. "I don't know, son, but I know it's worth trying." "And if it works, will people be coming here every week?" Ricardo wanted to know. "Probably. Why, didn't you like the idea?" "We liked it a lot," they both said at the same time. "It will be like having many different teachers." The twins joined the group, carrying the last posters they had made for the event. "Aunt Sharon," said Madison. She had started calling her that during the day. "Do you think your mother knows you're doing this?" The girl's question touched Sharon deeply. "I don't know, Madison, but I hope so. I think she knows," said Emily with the typical conviction of childhood. "And I think she's happy." That night, Sharon reread the letter Elizabeth had left for her. The words took on a different meaning now that she had met the other people her mother had loved. "I hope that one day you can understand that sometimes love forces us to make choices that seem cruel but are made with a heart full of care." For the first time, Sharon felt she truly understood. Elizabeth had made an impossible choice, but that choice had touched so many lives positively that its effects kept multiplying decades later. The first official meeting of the Knowledge Circle happened on a sunny Saturday morning, 3 weeks later. Many more people showed up than expected. Besides the former residents of the orphanage and the neighborhood children, adults from the region interested in learning new skills came. Paul set up a basic carpentry workshop in the shed that Richard had left. Tyler and Brandon were his first official students, absorbing every instruction with enthusiasm. Lucy organized a first aid course on the house's porch, using dolls and improvised materials to teach basic techniques that could save lives. Ruth brought her portable sewing machines and taught a group of women how to do basic clothing repairs. The twins showed themselves to be especially talented at embroidery. Jennifer coordinated reading and writing activities for children who were struggling in school. Your experience as a teacher was crucial for adapting the lessons to the specific needs of each child. But the biggest surprise came when a local businessman appeared mid-morning. Sharon didn't know him, but he introduced himself as Robert Thompson, owner of a hardware store in town. "Mrs. Sharon, I heard about your project through Town Talk. I'd like to offer a donation of materials to improve the facilities." "What kind of materials?" asked Sharon, surprised by the offer. "Paint, lumber, basic tools, electrical supplies, whatever you need to better organize the workspaces." The man's generosity moved everyone. Robert explained that he had lost his mother very early and had always admired projects that helped build community bonds. "But I have one condition," he said with a smile. "What is it?" asked Sharon, suspicious. "I want to bring my 10-year-old son to participate in the activities. He's very shy, and I think it would do him good to spend time with other kids, in an environment different from school." The condition was exactly the kind of expansion Sharon had hoped for the project. The more children who participated, the better it would be for everyone. During the community lunch that Mrs. Dorothy had organized, an unexpected proposal emerged. Matthew, the man who had learned to read with Elizabeth, approached Sharon with an idea. "Sharon, have you ever thought about documenting your mother's story? The stories we heard today should be preserved somehow." Document it how? Well, I work in communications. We could interview all the people who knew Aunt Elizabeth, write down their stories, maybe even make a small book. The idea of preserving Elizabeth's memory in a more permanent way pleased Sharon greatly. But who would read a book about a woman most people have never heard of? You'd be surprised, replied Matthew. Stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things always touch other hearts. And besides, it would be a way to honor all the people she helped. Jennifer joined the conversation, excited about the possibility. We could include some of the letters the children wrote to her, with the author's permission, of course. And the recipes she left behind, suggested Ruth. Those recipes tell stories, too. The idea took shape and gained support from other participants. It wouldn't be a commercial project, but rather a way to create a permanent record of the impact one person can have on the lives of others. At the end of the day, when everyone had left, Sharon took stock of what had happened. In just a few hours, the Knowledge Circle had taught practical skills, created new social bonds, generated spontaneous donations, and inspired a historical documentation project. It was exactly the kind of positive multiplication that Elizabeth Mitchell had created at the orphanage decades before. In the following weeks, the project continued to grow organically. New people showed up at each meeting, bringing their own skills and stories. A retiree taught basic gardening techniques. A homemaker shared knowledge about food preservation. A local musician began giving guitar lessons to the children. What had started as a nostalgic gathering had transformed into a true community support network. But then the first serious conflict arose. Dr. Howard Williams, bothered by the project's growing success, sent a new legal threat, this time claiming that Sharon was operating an informal school without the necessary licenses. "This is absurd," protested Jennifer when she learned of the former orphanage director's new move. "We're not a formal school, just a group of people who meet to exchange knowledge." "But is he right on some point?" asked Sharon, worried. "Do we need some kind of official authorization?" Matthew, who understood legal matters because of his work, reassured the group, "As long as we aren't charging money or issuing certificates, we can continue normally. It's just a social gathering with informal educational activities." "But why is Dr. Howard so interested in getting in our way?" Ruth wanted to know. The answer came from an unexpected source. John, the gas station owner who had kept Elizabeth's belongings, appeared at the next meeting with disturbing information. "Everyone, I found out something about Dr. Howard that you need to know. My brother-in-law works at the City Hall and told me he's trying to sell the land where the old orphanage was to a construction company." "And what does that have to do with us?" asked Sharon. "The construction company wants to build a low-income housing development on the site, but for that, they need there to be no historical or sentimental memory attached to the place. If your project grows too much and draws attention to the story of Aunt Elizabeth and the orphanage, it could complicate the sale." The revelation explained Dr. Howard's persistent hostility. It wasn't just personal pettiness, but financial interest. "What can we do?" asked Jennifer. "Continue normally," Sharon replied with determination. "We won't let one person's greed destroy something good we're building." The decision to continue brought everyone closer and more determined. It was as if Dr. Howard's opposition had given the group an even greater purpose. It was then that the children in the project had an idea that surprised all the adults. Tyler led a proposal they presented at a formal meeting of the Knowledge Circle. "We wanted to do an exhibition about the story of Mrs. Elizabeth and the orphanage, not to attack Dr. Howard, but to show the town what a good person can do when they dedicate themselves to helping others." The proposal was ambitious for a group of children, but they had thought of every detail. They wanted to use the local church hall, display the photographs they had collected, include testimonies from people who knew Elizabeth, and create a permanent memorial to her memory. "Do you think the church would lend the hall?" asked Sharon. "We already asked," replied Madison. "The priest said yes, as long as it's something educational and respectful." "And how do you plan to organize all this?" "Each person is responsible for one part," explained Emily. "We've already divided the tasks among everyone." The children's maturity and organization impressed the adults. Brandon would be responsible for making enlarged copies of the photographs. The twins would create explanatory texts. Tyler would coordinate the physical setup of the exhibition. The adults offered to help with technical aspects, but the children made it clear they wanted to lead the project. "Why is this so important to you?" asked Sharon. "Because Mrs. Elizabeth took care of children like us," Tyler replied with a simplicity that touched everyone's heart. "And if someone like her existed, maybe there are other good people in the world too." The exhibition was scheduled to take place 2 months later during the church's June festival. It would be a perfect opportunity to present Elizabeth's story to a larger audience. During the preparations, Sharon grew even closer to the children who had become fundamental to the project. They brought an energy and a perspective that the adults alone could never have created. Tyler revealed himself to be a natural leader, capable of motivating other children and organizing complex tasks. Brandon demonstrated unexpected artistic skills, creating posters and drawings that perfectly complemented the historical photographs. The twins, Emily and Madison, developed a perfect partnership, always completing each other's ideas and bringing creative solutions to practical problems. But it was during an afternoon of work that Sharon made a discovery that would change everything again. While organizing the photographs for the exhibition, she found a photo she hadn't noticed before. It was an image of the orphanage courtyard, with several children playing under Elizabeth's supervision. In the right corner of the photo, almost out of frame, was a man working in the garden. When Sharon looked more closely, she realized the man was identical to a younger Gary. "Gary!" she called, showing him the photo. "Isn't this man in the photo you?" Gary looked at the image and turned pale. "That's my father," he said in a low voice. "He worked as a gardener at the orphanage." "You never mentioned that." Because it's complicated. My father left the job just before Aunt Elizabeth was fired. He never liked to talk about that time." Once again, Gary seemed to be hiding important information. Sharon decided it was time to have a frank conversation with him. "Gary, I need you to be completely honest with me. What else do you know about my mother that you haven't told me?" Gary sighed deeply, like a man who had finally decided to unburden himself of a weight he'd carried for years. My father was fired because he tried to defend Aunt Elizabeth when Dr. Howard accused her of misconduct. He told Dr. Howard he was committing an injustice and was sent away that same day. And what else? My father knew where Aunt Elizabeth had gone when she left town. She asked him not to tell anyone, but what? She didn't leave the region, Mrs. Sharon. She went to live in a small town about 100 kilometers from here. My father told me this shortly before he passed away. The revelation hit Sharon like a bolt of lightning. Elizabeth hadn't disappeared far away, but had remained relatively close. What if she was still alive? "Gary, what town?" "St. Benedict Springs. It was a very small community back then, lost in the mountains. My father said she went to work at a rural school there." "When did your father die?" 5 years ago. "And you never thought of looking for my mother to return the letters?" "I thought about it many times, Mrs. Sharon. But my father made me promise I would only tell this if someone from her family came asking, and until you showed up, no one ever asked." Sharon felt a mix of anger and understanding. Gary had kept a secret that could have changed her life, but he had done so out of loyalty to his father and the promises he had made. "Do you think she could still be alive?" "I don't know, Mrs. Sharon. That was over 30 years ago. But if she is, she'd be in her 70s now." The possibility that Elizabeth might still be alive changed everything completely. Sharon had spent years making peace with the memory of a dead woman. But what if she could have a real conversation with her mother? "Do you want to go with me to St. Benedict Springs?" "Yes, I do, Mrs. Sharon. I think it's my duty to help you find the truth." Sharon decided not to tell the children about the new discovery until she was sure of something. She didn't want to create expectations that could be dashed, but she told Jennifer, who was as emotional as she was about the possibility. "If Aunt Elizabeth is alive, imagine the happiness it will be for her to know that so many people still remember her fondly," said Jennifer. "And imagine the shock of discovering that the daughter she abandoned is looking for her," replied Sharon, less optimistic. The trip to St. Benedict Springs was scheduled for the following week. Sharon was nervous, but also determined to finally close the circle of her family's story. St. Benedict Springs was truly a small town, still preserving much of the architecture and pace of life from decades past. Sharon and Gary began their investigation at the rural school, which now operated as a community center. The center's director, an elderly woman named Vivian, vaguely remembered Elizabeth Mitchell. "Oh, Teacher Elizabeth, of course I remember. She worked here for about 15 years, from the late 80s until the early 2000s. She was an exceptional educator, very beloved by the local families. Do you know what happened to her after that? She retired and went to live on a small farm on the outskirts of town, but that was about 20 years ago. I don't know if she's still there." Vivian gave directions to the farm, but warned that the place was isolated and hard to reach. Sharon and Gary decided to try anyway. The road leading to the farm was dirt, full of potholes and sharp curves. After almost an hour of tense driving, they arrived at a small property surrounded by fruit trees and a well-kept vegetable garden. The house was simple but cozy, with a wide porch and open windows letting in the afternoon breeze. In the backyard, an elderly woman was tending to a flower garden. When she turned to see who had arrived, Sharon felt the world stop. Even with graying hair and a face marked by age, it was undeniably Elizabeth Mitchell. The eyes were the same ones Sharon saw in the old photographs, and the gentle smile that appeared on her face was identical to the one in the pictures with the children from the orphanage. Elizabeth stopped what she was doing and stared intently at Sharon as if seeing an apparition. "Sharon," she said with a trembling voice, "my daughter." The moment of the encounter was charged with such intense emotion that both were paralyzed for a few seconds. Then Elizabeth dropped the gardening tool she was holding and walked slowly toward her daughter. "How did you find me?" asked Elizabeth, tears streaming down her face. "It's a long story, Mom. A story involving an old car, letters kept for decades, and dozens of people who never forgot you." The hug that followed was tentative at first, as if both were testing whether that moment was real. Then it became long and full of all the years of separation that needed to be compensated for. Gary remained discreetly at a distance, giving mother and daughter the space they needed for that unique moment. "Are you well? Are you happy?" were Elizabeth's first questions. "I'm well, Mom. And lately I've been happier than I've been in many years." "Tell me everything. I want to know about your whole life." They sat on the porch of the house, and Sharon began to tell her story. She talked about the grandparents who raised her, about the husband she lost, about the farm she inherited, and especially about the discovery of the letters and the reunion with all the people Elizabeth had touched. Elizabeth listened to every word with total attention, occasionally asking questions or making comments that showed how much she cared about every detail of the life she had missed. "And all those children, they remember me?" asked Elizabeth, when Sharon finished telling her about the Knowledge Circle. "Not only do they remember, Mom, they carry you in their hearts as if you were still part of their lives. Jennifer speaks of you with the same affection as when she was a child." "Jenny, how is she?" "She's a teacher now. She has her own children and is a wonderful woman, and she'll be overjoyed when she finds out you're alive." Elizabeth cried upon learning that Jennifer had followed in her footsteps in education. "I always knew she would be special. She was such an intelligent and caring girl." "Mum, can I ask a question that has been bothering me for a long time?" "Of course, daughter. Do you regret the choice you made? To leave me to take care of the children at the orphanage?" Elizabeth fell silent for a few minutes, carefully choosing her words. "I regret the way I did it. I should have found a way to keep you close, even while working at the orphanage. But I don't regret helping those children. They really needed someone who cared. And I didn't need that. You had your grandparents who were wonderful people and could give you an education and stability that I couldn't provide. The children at the orphanage had no one." Elizabeth's logic was the same that had guided her decisions decades before, and Sharon could finally understand it without resentment. "Mother, would you like to meet the people who are continuing your work?" "What do you mean?" Sharon told her about the Knowledge Circle, about how all the people Elizabeth had helped were now working together to create a community support network. "That is exactly what I always dreamed would happen," said Elizabeth, her eyes shining. that the children would grow up and use the love they received to help others. Would you like to participate? I would love to, but St. Benedict Springs is very far, and I'm too old for big changes now. Mother, said Sharon, gathering courage to make a proposal that had just been born in her heart at that moment, wouldn't you like to come live with me? The property is large, and you could have your own house without giving up your independence. The proposal took Elizabeth by surprise. She had lived alone for so many years that the idea of having family close again seemed almost impossible. You would really want that, after everything I did? Mother, I spent 43 years imagining who you were. Now that I've finally found you, I don't want to waste any more time. Elizabeth looked at the garden she had tended with so much love, then at the simple house where she had found peace, and finally at the daughter she had reunited with. I need a few days to think. It's a very big decision. Of course, there's no rush, but I want you to know you would be very welcome. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, filling in decades of gaps. Elizabeth told her about her years in St. Benedict Springs, about the students she had taught, about the loneliness she had chosen as the price for her past decisions. Sharon talked about the children of the Knowledge Circle, about how they had been inspired by Elizabeth's story to create something new and beautiful. When it was time to leave, they both knew something fundamental had changed between them. It wasn't forgiveness, because there was nothing to forgive. It was understanding, acceptance, and the beginning of a new relationship based on who they were now, not who they had been in the past. On the trip back, Gary remained respectfully quiet, sensing that Sharon needed time to process everything that had happened. Gary, she finally said, thank you. If you hadn't told me about St. Benedict Springs, I never would have found my mother. It was my pleasure, Mrs. Sharon, and your mother. She seems to be exactly as my father always described, a special person. When they arrived back at the property, the children were waiting anxiously for news. Sharon had promised to tell them about the trip as soon as she returned. So, Mrs. Sharon, did you find out anything in St. Benedict Springs? Asked Tyler. We found out much more than we expected, she replied with a smile she couldn't hide. What do you mean? Asked the twins at the same time. We found out that my mother is alive, and that she would very much like to meet you. The uproar that followed the revelation was indescribable. The children shouted, jumped, asked 1,000 questions at once. Mrs. Dorothy, who had appeared at the moment of the revelation, had to sit down to keep from falling. Alive? Elizabeth Mitchell is alive? Repeated the lady in disbelief. Alive and living on a farm in St. Benedict Springs, and possibly moving nearby soon. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood and reached Jennifer before Sharon could even call her. When they finally managed to talk, the teacher was crying so much she could barely speak. Aunt Elizabeth is alive, after so many years. It's a miracle, sobbed Jennifer, and she remembers you perfectly. When I told her you became a teacher, she was so proud she started crying. When can I see her? Asked Jennifer eagerly. I'll call her tomorrow to arrange a visit. But Jennifer, you need to be prepared. She's older, of course, but mainly she carries a lot of emotional weight about the decisions she made in the past. It doesn't matter. I just want to hug my heart's mother one more time. In the following days, the preparation for Elizabeth's visit turned into a collective project. The children wanted everything to be perfect to welcome her, while the adults prepared emotionally to reunite with someone who had been fundamental in their lives. Paul, the carpenter, decided to make a special gift for Elizabeth, a rocking chair made with wood from the region itself. Every elderly lady deserves a rocking chair, he said, working with extra dedication on every detail. Ruth organized with other women from the area to make a community quilt, where each person would contribute a square telling a memory of Elizabeth or expressing gratitude for her influence. The twins wrote a song about Elizabeth's story, which they planned to sing during the visit. When Elizabeth finally arrived for the visit, a week later, she was received like royalty. Jennifer arrived early and waited nervously on the porch of Sharon's house. The moment of reunion between Elizabeth and Jennifer was even more emotional than the meeting between mother and daughter had been. Jennifer, a mature and confident woman, became a child again the moment she saw Elizabeth getting out of the car. "Jenny, my girl," said Elizabeth, opening her arms. "Aunt Elizabeth, I knew I would find you one day," replied Jennifer, running into the hug. The other former residents of the orphanage who had managed to come for the visit formed an emotional line to greet Elizabeth. Each reunion brought tears and memories, recreating bonds that had been abruptly interrupted decades before. But it was the meeting with the neighborhood children that surprised Elizabeth the most. Tyler, Brandon, and the twins welcomed her with a naturalness and affection that caught her off guard. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Madison, "we've heard so many stories about you that we already felt like we knew you. And we wanted to thank you for taking care of the people who are taking care of us now," added Emily. The girl's simple observation touched Elizabeth in a profound way. She was seeing in practice how love can multiply through generations. During the day, Elizabeth participated in all the activities of the Knowledge Circle. She watched Paul's carpentry lessons, helped Lucy with first aid demonstrations, and even contributed some of her own recipes to the community notebook that Ruth was organizing. "This is so much more than I dreamed could happen," Elizabeth said to Sharon in the late afternoon. "You've created a chosen family based on love and mutual learning." "We created it, Mother. This was only possible because you planted the right seeds in the right people." When the time came for Elizabeth to decide on Sharon's proposal to come live on the property, she already knew what her answer would be. "Daughter, I accept, but on one condition." "What?" "I want to contribute financially to improve the Knowledge Circle's facilities. I have savings I've never used because I live alone. I would like to invest in creating a permanent space for the activities." Elizabeth's offer was generous, but more than that, it was symbolic. She was choosing to invest her future in the project that continued the work of her lifetime. In the following months, Sharon's property was transformed into a small learning community. Elizabeth brought her savings and her educational experience, helping to create suitable spaces for different types of activities. A small house was built for Elizabeth about 100 meters from the main house, giving her independence while maintaining family proximity. The shed was renovated and equipped as a woodworking workshop. A covered space was created for outdoor activities. The car that had started the whole adventure was restored and turned into a symbol of the project. Parked at the entrance to the property, it bore a sign explaining its history and inviting visitors to learn about the Knowledge Circle. 6 months after the first visit, Elizabeth was completely integrated into the new life. She had taken on the pedagogical coordination of children's activities, created an adult literacy program, and become the unofficial grandmother of all the children in the region. The relationship between Elizabeth and Sharon continued to evolve naturally. They learned to live together as adults, respecting their differences and celebrating the similarities they discovered each day. Jennifer became a frequent visitor, often bringing her own children to participate in the activities. The Knowledge Circle had become a meeting point for families from across the region. But perhaps the most beautiful transformation happened with the neighborhood children. Tyler developed a genuine passion for woodworking and was creating increasingly sophisticated pieces under Paul's guidance. Brandon discovered a talent for drawing and was visually documenting all the project's activities. The twins Emily and Madison became informal assistants to Elizabeth, helping with educational activities and demonstrating an emotional maturity that impressed all the adults. 1 year after it all began, the project had grown so much that it began receiving visitors from other towns interested in replicating the initiative. Elizabeth and Sharon were invited to give talks on community education and intergenerational bonds. "I never imagined it would become so big," said Sharon on one such occasion. "I did," replied Elizabeth with a smile. "I always knew that when you plant genuine love, the harvest is abundant." The exhibition about Elizabeth's life, originally planned by the children for the summer festival, was expanded and became permanent in a room at the town's community center. The photographs, letters, and testimonies attracted regular visitors and inspired other social projects in the region. Dr. Howard Williams, faced with the project's growing success and the positive attention it was bringing to the town, finally gave up on his attempts to interfere. The land of the old orphanage was sold to the construction company, but the memory of Elizabeth had found a much better home on Sharon's property. On the second anniversary of the Knowledge Circle, a special surprise was being prepared. Matthew had finished the book about Elizabeth's life, including testimonies from all the people she had touched over the years. The book launch took place during a party at the property, attended by over 100 people, former residents of the orphanage, participants of the Knowledge Circle, local authorities and curious onlookers who had followed the story through the local media. "This book is not about me," said Elizabeth during the launch speech. "It's about how love can multiply when it finds receptive hearts. Every person here today is proof that no act of kindness is too small to make a difference in someone's life." The book became a regional and then a national success, inspiring the creation of other knowledge circles in different cities. Elizabeth and Sharon received invitations to give lectures at universities, but they always preferred the smaller, more intimate gatherings at the farm. True education happens in the day-to-day, in small interactions, not in big auditoriums, Elizabeth would say. 3 years after the first meeting at the cliff, Sharon took stock of everything that had changed in her life. The property that was once a lonely burden had become a center of life and learning. The mother she had hated for decades had become her best friend and work partner. But most of all, she had discovered the true meaning of family. Not just blood ties, but the connections created through mutual care, shared education and love that multiplies when given freely. "Sharon," said Elizabeth one afternoon as they watched the children playing in the yard, "do you think I made the right choice all those years ago?" "Mother, you made the only choice your conscience allowed, and look what came of it. Without your influence on those children at the orphanage, none of this would have happened. And can you forgive me?" "I don't need to forgive someone who never hurt me, Mother. You gave me something far more valuable than a normal childhood. You gave me an example of how love can be stronger than circumstances." Elizabeth smiled, finally at peace with the choices of her past. At 75, she had found not only the daughter she left behind, but an entire family that grew from the seeds she planted decades before. The sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky with golden hues that illuminated the farm where it all began. The old car was still parked in the driveway, now cleaned and restored, but keeping the marks of the adventure that had made that extraordinary reunion possible. Tyler and Brandon ran around the yard, playing with other boys who had joined the group over the years. The twins, Emily and Madison, were teaching a new child how to make origami under the large tree that shaded the main house. Mrs. Dorothy, now 77, continued to oversee everything with her tireless energy, always ready with advice or a new recipe to try. Jennifer arrived for the weekly Knowledge Circle meeting, bringing her children and some students from the school who wanted to participate in the activities. Paul was in the barn, teaching woodworking techniques to an enthusiastic group that included everyone from 8-year-olds to 60-year-old retirees. "Mother," said Sharon, sitting next to Elizabeth on the bench that Paul had built especially for them, "thank you." "Thank you for what, daughter?" "For teaching me, even without being present, that true love sometimes requires sacrifices that only make sense a long time later." Elizabeth took her daughter's hand and squeezed it affectionately. "And thank you for finding me when I had given up on being found, for giving me the chance to know the wonderful woman you became." "And now?" "Now we keep planting seeds, daughter, because we've discovered that's the only way to ensure love keeps multiplying after we're no longer here." Sharon looked around, seeing all the people who had become her extended family. Each had their own story, their own wounds and joys, but all were connected by the invisible thread of mutual care that Elizabeth had taught them to weave. The Knowledge Circle had become much more than an educational project. It was a living demonstration that it's possible to create family bonds based on the conscious choice to care for one another. "Sharon," called Tyler, approaching the bench where mother and daughter were talking, "could you come see what we're doing?" "We finished that project we started last month." Sharon stood up, but Elizabeth remained seated. "Go ahead, dear. I'll stay here admiring what we built together." When Sharon walked away, Elizabeth closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The scent of the flowers she had planted in the garden mixed with the sounds of cheerful voices filling the property. It was the sound of a happy family, different from any traditional family, but no less real or loving. For the first time in decades, Elizabeth Mitchell felt she was exactly where she should be, doing exactly what she should be doing. It had taken over 40 years, but finally the circle had closed. The love she had spread at the orphanage had returned to her multiplied through the daughter she had reunited with, the children who had never forgotten her, and the new generations who were learning that family is much more than blood. It's choice, care, and mutual growth. As the day drew to a close, Elizabeth opened her eyes and saw Sharon returning, now accompanied by all the children from the knowledge circle. They were carrying something in their hands. It looked like a large canvas covered with a cloth. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Madison, speaking on behalf of the group, "we have a surprise for you." When they removed the cloth, they revealed a large panel with photographs of all the important moments in the history of the knowledge circle. In the center was one of the old photos of Elizabeth at the orphanage, surrounded by images of all the meetings, activities, and celebrations that had happened in recent years. "We wanted you to see how the story continues," explained Emily. "How the love you planted kept growing," added Tyler. Elizabeth rose from the bench with tears in her eyes, observing every detail of the panel. There, documented, was the visual proof that her life had made a lasting difference in the world. "Thank you," was all she could say, too emotional to elaborate. In that moment, with the golden sun lighting her face and surrounded by all the people she loved, Elizabeth Mitchell finally understood that she had made all the right decisions. The path had been painful and full of sacrifices, but the destination was exactly what her heart had always dreamed of. A family made of chosen love, shared education, and hearts that had learned that caring for one another was the purest form of happiness. End of story. So, dear listeners, what did you think of this story of love, sacrifice, and reunion? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever experienced an emotional family reunion like this one. Did Elizabeth make the right decision by sacrificing her own happiness for the children at the orphanage? Leave your honest opinion below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heart-touching stories.